Hello again everybody, and welcome to the English Teacher's Guide to gaining perfect marks for the A2 Literature exam for English, the AQA A paper. Let's quickly look at the exam structure, shall we? So this is worth 30% of your A level, 60% of your A2, because the other 40 is your coursework. It's a 2.5 hour paper with 80 marks, and there are 2 questions here. Both are worth 40 marks each, and the assessment objectives are split evenly, so 10 marks each, which makes revision and memory and makes it easier. So question 1, you'll get 2 texts from the same form, novels, poems or plays, and you'll need to bring in therefore 1 wider reading text from that same form. Question 2, you need to compare the other 2 forms that weren't used in question 1, making sure that you include your wider reading, which covers now one from the other form. The difference between the 2 questions is that question 2 you'll have a named focus, so explore brotherly love, explore illicit love, where in question 1 you're going to be expected to create your own argument, find your own link. 2 questions for you. Let's see if you've been working hard this year. 1, how do you plan your responses? 2, how do you write the perfect response? Now it's a good time here to pause this, note down what you know, and then we can compare how I think you should do it. So before we can start to plan a perfect response, we need to look at the mark scheme. This is for the top band. This has been the same since you started your A levels. So it was the same for the AS exams, same for the AS coursework, it was the same for your coursework for this year, and it's the same for the exam, unsurprisingly. Let's look at some of the key wording though. So for AO1, which is your ability to write a proper essay, make sure you're confident. So you should back up your argument. So it shouldn't be things like it could mean this, it might mean that. No, it does. I believe this is what this is about and I'm going to prove it. You need to make sure that you are using terminology throughout your work, and you need to make sure that you structure your work in the correct way. Everything links together. You're making sure that your work is easily understood but sophisticated at the same time. AO2, obviously we need to, with insight, analyze structure, form and language. So both responses need to make sure it covers structure, form and language. You need to show that you can quote in a masterful way, making sure that you are using it coherently within your writing, making sure you use only what you need, and making sure you've got an overview of texts. So that's where you can put that into your introduction, that overview. We don't go into too much basic detail. 3, we need to compare our texts in depth, making sure that we are exploring how and why they are similar. We need to make sure that our alternative readings are in place. That could be the work of critics, that could be your own alternative viewpoint, or it could be the viewpoint of, say, a feminist argument or a psychoanalytical argument. What's a really good tip here in order to illuminate your interpretation is to argue against the alternative viewpoint. So a feminist would say this, however, and that will only strengthen your own view and get you a better mark for AO1. And AO4 obviously is the use of social, historical and literary context. Now we need to make sure we're using that not just in a really basic way, we need to make sure it's supporting, it's illuminating our arguments. We analyse, it's been presented in this way because of this, and that could be where your context comes in. Do all those things on that mark scheme there, you achieve perfect marks. But how do we do that? Well, this is how we plan for question 1. The only difference between this and question 2 is, as we said, question 2, the focus is already named for you, where here, you have to do it yourself. So, first of all, you're in the exam room, papers in front of you. Read through both biographies and start to immediately annotate and compare the different texts. So, is the date similar, the genre, the literary period, the themes, etc.? If you know anything about the authors, you can start to note those things down. You can start to already consider, well, what can my wider reading be? Then you should read through the text without making any real annotations. It's recommended that you do that because first things first, the most important aspect of this is that you understand the texts. I've seen too many students in the past rush, not read a text properly and misinterpret it and get very low marks. Once you've read through it once, maybe twice, maybe a third time, then you've got a good understanding of it, That's when you start to really annotate in detail, making sure you've covered structure, form, language. You need to then do that to your second text, and you can then start to consider what's similar and different about them. Once you've done that as well and you've got a good understanding of both texts, you then need to decide what your wider reading will be. You know, what complements these two texts well? What will help my argument? Not just, hopefully you revise to the point where you've not just put something in because that's all you remember. You're using a text because that works really well with the argument you're going to come up with. Then we need to begin to formally plan. So what you need to do is create a focus or an argument for your essay. So what is the idea that's being presented in both these texts? So that could be the presentation of divorce, it could be the presentation of sisterly love, for instance. And then how is that being presented? So do they present that in a similar or different way? And that is your focus, isn't it? You're almost giving yourself your own essay question. And that's when we can start to plan our 3 points, I would say. And once you've got that planned, within half an hour, we're ready to go. But remember, the important thing is to discover what the texts are about, how they are similar and different, why they are similar and different. Do those things, perfect marks will be yours. Now, this is what a question will look like. So here we're going to use Shakespeare of Fellows and Albie's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Now, I'm not going to show you the planning stage for this today, but it's both sections are where the male figures are dealing angrily with issues related to their wives, where they feel they're being confronted, challenged by them. So that's what I wanted to look at. But let's look at how we actually write the essay. So introduction. You need to avoid using generic information. So this text written in this period is, or this text also written in this period does this. This means it would be. You don't need that. Get on with it. State your argument. Okay, state your argument. What are they both about? Maybe some very basic setting of the focus. You know, give them an overview, but that would be it. Then we need to get into our 3 main paragraphs. So this is where you achieve the majority of your marks. You should ensure, obviously, that each paragraph you've analysed all aspects of AO2, AO3 and AO4. However, this may not be possible in each of your main paragraphs, but you must make sure that you've covered this by the end of your essay. You can use the method I'm about to show you. I know obviously there are slight variations, but if you remember this will make sure that you achieve perfect marks. Because remember, it's just important to know your method as it is to know your content. So 1, create a point which establishes what the paragraph will be about, but immediately compare the 2 texts briefly. So you're straight away comparing the 2 texts, you create that topic sentence so we know what this essay is going to be about. Then we examine the first text based on this point. So we use all our insight of AO2, we use alternative viewpoints, we use our social, literary and historical context, and we do that in depth. Then 3, we make a linking statement which links both texts again, and we start to explore the second text in the same way we did for text 1, but at each point of analysis we should now compare to our other text. So is this similar or different, and why is it similar or different? And it's exploring that why that will help us achieve our marks in our comparison. Then, once we feel we've dealt with the 2 texts successfully, that's when we use our 10% of our wider reading, using the same process, but we make sure that we're comparing the 2 texts together. Then our conclusion, you need to reaffirm your argument once more, making it clear why you feel about the texts this way, and why they've presented love in that way also. Okay, so if you need to go back and have a look at those things again. But that will work for both question 1 and question 2. In fact, question 2 is easier because the focus is already there for you. But that's a really important thing. You need a focus for your argument. So what will mine look like? Let's have a look. This is my introduction. Within both texts, so straight away, there's no generic rubbish being used here. We're getting straight on with it, and this is what the examiner wants to see. The breakdown of marriage, seemingly instigated in part by the fatal flaw of the male protagonist, is evident. In Shakespeare's Renaissance tragedy, Othello, the tragic flaw of jealousy is the reason for the collapse of marriage the audience witness. Whilst in the American modern work of Albee, it appears that alcohol is the element which has brought about the almost bestial scene the audience observe. However, it seems that the character of Othello is far more, so this is the argument, isn't it? Far more physically controlling of his wife, due in part to the laws that govern marriage at the time, compared to the more psychologically controlling figure in Albee's work. Go straight on with it, mention both texts, there's my argument, already starting to put some context and things like that in there. Let's look at my main paragraph, shall we? As mentioned above, the bestial behaviour of the male protagonist in both extracts is presented as the overriding issue within. There is my point, which compares both. Shakespeare's Othello, believing his young wife has been having an affair, publicly insults her by not only striking her, so mastery of detail, but through extremely offensive language such as repetition of devil, suggesting she is not just sinful, but she is actually the devil incarnate. At a highly Christocentric period in English history, this lexical choice highlights the extreme feeling of hatred the protagonist now feels towards his wife. For a contemporary audience of Shakespeare, in many ways this would have been seemingly ironic, as the character of Othello, or Moore, would have been viewed as a devil himself and expected to act in sinful rather than gentlemanly manner. Therefore, whilst the action of striking a woman is always shocking to an audience, Shakespeare is playing with stereotypes, suggesting in a way that the character's traditional tragic flaw is not solely jealousy, but his race. Shakespeare then utilises the syllabic structure of iambic pentameter to form later in the extract to highlight to the actor playing the role. Actors at the time would have had to use the lines given to them to detect stage directions, the anger of the figure at the time. By stressing lexes such as you, she, and turn, Shakespeare shows a character who is not only aggressive, who is accusational in tone, in a way which disengages himself from Desdemona and places the blame for his emotional state firmly on her. Alternatively, this behaviour could be highlighting a reaction a disempowered male demonstrates when he believes the female has broken away from traditional conduct of patriarchal society, leading a feminist reader to highlight how desperate male society is to cling to its control of the female. What's important to notice here, if we just stop for a second, is that I'm not sort of going through AO2, AO3, AO4. I'm using it naturally when it feels right to make a statement about context, when it feels right to make a statement about using alternative views. They're being used, and that's important to remember. Use those different AOs when it feels right, not when you kind of know you might have to. It's not bolted together, it all flows nicely. Okay, and that's important to remember. This argument could be said to be the case with Albee's modern play. So there's my linking statement. George displays a similar reaction to Othello by slapping his wife Martha, as he believes she has been pouring the undergraduates. Once again, the shocking animalistic violence of the male as a reaction to a loss of control demonstrates that the fear patriarchal society has of losing control. This is even more relevant for Albee's audience due to the rise of the feminist movement within America at the time. The lexical choice of Albee are similar, so here's the comparison, in the sense that they exclude a sinful character to the audience. They exude a sinful character to the audience and highlight a clear belief by the male character that the female is in the wrong. And again, it's important to remember these are both written by men, interestingly. The use of undergraduates language suggests an almost paedophilic nature, and when this is combined with the fact that she is a married woman, will lead at least some in the audience to consider Martha a devil. So there's our comparison. The use of pause, rather than creating a sense of distance in the relationship, as seen in Othello, depicts Martha as inhuman, reinforcing the uncivilized nature of the female in the eyes of the male protagonist, even though, ironically, it is the male in both extracts who is displaying the uncivilized characteristics. Now, again, what's important to note here is I could go in this in more detail for my example. However, you've got 45 minutes to write this, so it's not going to be perfect. And it's important to note that you can still get perfect marks without being coursework perfect. But the closer we get to that coursework standard, the easier it is for you to achieve perfect marks. Now, here's my 10% of my wider reading. Ibsen's Victorian drama, A Doll's House, once again demonstrates a male desperate to maintain control. However, in this case, the female breaks free of her most sacred duties, causing her character husband Helmer to declare, "This is monstrous." His exclamation at this point could again reflect the anger, incredulousness he and the patriarchal society represents feels at the thought of the female breaking the bonds of the traditional female role. Similarly to Shakespeare, Ibsen uses religious imagery as a way to persuade the female figure that breaking the bonds of marriage or traditional control is the most sinful behaviour a wife can display, making him appear a devil within the male gaze. In fact, this sentiment was supported so strongly by male society that the audience actually rioted at the very notion of the breakdown of traditional society. Therefore, the audience reflect the bestial behaviour of the protagonists from both of the extracts, suggesting that the behaviour is not actually dramatic, but a realistic depiction of social behaviour. Okay, so that system there follows the method you've been asked to use. I'll use that again for a further second and third paragraph, and then I move into my conclusion. They're all linked together, they're all working nicely. Although written around 300 years apart, the depiction of the male protagonists show the male view of women within marriage has altered little over this period. Both characters are cruel to their significant others, which is in part due to the disrespect that their partners have shown them in public. However, and as stated earlier, this lack of control, shown in particular by Othello, is deemed more shocking to an audience due to the physical nature of his anger, which is seen as shocking in part due to his ungentlemanly nature, but also perhaps due to the fact that his character's strength puts him at an unfair advantage over the female. I make sure I proofread my work carefully at the end, and that's it. I move on to question 2. So thank you, and make sure you continue to work hard. There's a link here to bring up some of the past papers, but it's important that you practice this method. Practice planning in half an hour, practice writing in 45 minutes. So remember, we must make sure we cover all aspects of the mark scheme. Write about them when it feels natural to write about them, but planning is the crucial part of this. So remember, it's content, method, timing. Do it in the time, revise the method as well as you would do the actual content, and know the text inside out. Keep working hard, good luck, well done.